On March 24, 1603, an era ended. Elizabeth IV, the last of the Tudor monarchs, breathed her last at Richmond Palace. She was 69 years old, a remarkable age for the time, especially considering the tumultuous life she led. But the story of her final days, the official story that has been passed down through history books, is riddled with inconsistencies. Was it truly a peaceful passing? A natural conclusion to a long and arduous reign? Or was there something more sinister at play? That's the question we're going to delve into. For over 4 decades, Elizabeth had steered England through religious turmoil, political intrigue, and the ever-present threat of foreign invasion. She was a master of diplomacy, a shrewd political operator, and a powerful symbol of English strength. But even the strongest monarchs are ultimately human, and by the dawn of the 17th century, the Queen's health was undeniably failing. Contemporary accounts paint a picture of a monarch in decline. Letters from courtiers and ambassadors, the closest witnesses to her daily life, describe a queen who was increasingly frail, fatigued, and withdrawn. She struggled to maintain the energy and sharp wit that had defined her reign. Imagine for a moment the weight of a kingdom pressing down on you, the constant pressure of making life or death decisions, the relentless scrutiny of your every move. It's a wonder she lasted as long as she did. But here's where the inconsistencies begin to surface. While some accounts describe a gradual decline, a slow and steady fading away, others depict a more erratic pattern: sudden bouts of fever, unexplained weakness, and periods of deep melancholy. Some observers noted a decline over months, while others speak of a rapid deterioration in the weeks leading up to her death. Were these simply different perspectives on the same reality, or were they glimpses of something deliberately concealed? One particularly telling account comes from a letter written by a foreign ambassador. He described Elizabeth as thin and fragile, a stark contrast to the powerful, commanding presence she had projected for decades. However, he also noted that her mind remained sharp, a juxtaposition of physical decline and unwavering mental acuity that is a recurring theme in the descriptions of her final days. This makes us question if her mind was clear, then why the sudden weakness? The Queen herself seemed to be aware of her declining health, yet she remained stubbornly involved in affairs of state, signing documents and issuing instructions right up until the very end. This unwavering dedication to her duty, while admirable, also raises questions. Was she trying to maintain a facade of strength, concealing the true extent of her illness from the world? Or was she desperately clinging to power, afraid to relinquish control even as her body failed her? Perhaps one of the most puzzling aspects of Elizabeth's final days is her reported refusal to eat. Several accounts mention that she had little appetite and stubbornly refused to take nourishment. This is a particularly worrying detail, as malnutrition would have undoubtedly accelerated her physical decline. Was this a symptom of her illness, a manifestation of depression, or something else entirely? Adding to the confusion is the conflicting information about her mental state. Some witnesses claim that she remained lucid and coherent until the very end, while others describe periods of confusion and even delirium. These discrepancies raise questions about the nature of her illness and whether there might have been other factors affecting her cognitive function. Was this the natural process of aging, the effects of a high fever, or something more insidious? And then there are the rumors, the whispers that circulated throughout the court like a persistent cough. These rumors, often unsubstantiated and difficult to verify, hinted at dark secrets and hidden agendas. Some whispered of poisoning, of courtly intrigue, and of deliberate neglect. While there is no concrete evidence to support these claims, the very fact that they existed speaks volumes about the atmosphere of suspicion and paranoia that pervaded the Elizabethan court. The problem is, we can't know for certain, because medical knowledge at the time was rudimentary, to say the least. Doctors relied on theories of balancing humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and their treatments were often as likely to harm as to heal. Terms like ague and flux were used to describe conditions we now know as pneumonia, influenza, or other infections. But none of it was definitive, which further complicates our understanding of what truly happened in those final days. This all leads to an important question. Was Elizabeth I's death truly a natural one? A consequence of old age and declining health? Or was it influenced by other factors, perhaps even darker forces at play? While the official story presents a picture of peaceful passing, the inconsistencies in the accounts, the rumors at court, and the limitations of medical knowledge all suggest that there may be more to the story than meets the eye. The Queen's death also had significant political implications. Elizabeth, famously known as the Virgin Queen, never married or produced an heir. This created a succession crisis that loomed over England for decades. While James VI of Scotland was the obvious choice, there were factions within the court who opposed his ascension, fearing a loss of power and influence. Elizabeth's death, therefore, occurred amidst a climate of political uncertainty and intrigue, raising the stakes for everyone involved. So, we must ask ourselves, can we truly trust the official narrative? Can we be certain that the truth about Elizabeth I's death has been accurately preserved for posterity? The answers, as we will see, are far from clear. So we've established that the official narrative surrounding Elizabeth I's death is, well, let's just say it's not quite adding up. The inconsistencies in the accounts, the whispers in the corridors, the sheer political weight of the succession, it all points to the possibility that something more sinister was at play. Let's dive into the murky depths of these suspicions and examine the darker theories that have haunted historians for centuries. One of the most enduring and, frankly, tantalizing theories revolves around the idea of poisoning. Now remember, this is the 16th and 17th centuries we're talking about. Forget modern forensics. This was an era where poison was both a science and an art, and often the line between medicine and murder was blurry, to say the least. Arsenic, mercury, belladonna. These weren't just ingredients in apothecaries' shops. They were also weapons of choice for those seeking power, revenge, or a convenient solution to a political problem. The question is, could Elizabeth have been a victim of such foul play? Some historians argue that her reported symptoms, the sudden bouts of weakness, the confusion, the digestive issues, could be indicative of slow poisoning. Arsenic, in particular, was notoriously difficult to detect at the time, and a gradual administration could mimic the symptoms of a natural decline, masking the true cause of death. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. There's absolutely no concrete evidence to support this theory. No smoking gun, no confession, no smoking goblet, so to speak. No contemporary physician explicitly pointed to poison as the cause of Elizabeth's demise. Her symptoms, as we've already discussed, could just as easily be attributed to old age, underlying illnesses, or even the sheer stress of ruling a kingdom for nearly half a century. So why does this theory persist? Because the Tudor court was a viper's nest of political intrigue, where alliances shifted like sand and the stakes were always impossibly high. And Elizabeth, as the head of that court, was constantly surrounded by individuals who had reason to want her gone. Think about it. She had no direct heir, which created a succession crisis that had been brewing for decades. Different factions within the court were vying for influence, each backing their preferred candidate for the throne. The Earl of Essex's failed rebellion just a few years prior showed how quickly discontent could boil over. And foreign powers like Spain and France were keenly aware that Elizabeth's death could dramatically alter the balance of power in Europe. In this environment, the possibility of someone orchestrating her demise for political gain becomes, well, at least a little bit believable. Could a rival claimant to the throne or their supporters have seen Elizabeth's death as the only way to secure their ambitions? Could a foreign power have sought to destabilize England by removing its powerful queen? Again, we have no definitive answers, only tantalizing clues and a healthy dose of historical speculation. Letters from foreign ambassadors, for instance, often hint at secretive meetings and whispered conversations within the court, suggesting a level of political maneuvering that went far beyond the ordinary. Could these be subtle references to a plot against the Queen? It's impossible to say for sure, but the possibility lingers. But let's move beyond the cloak and dagger world of poison and explore another, perhaps more subtle but equally sinister theory: deliberate neglect. Now, this isn't about a grand conspiracy to actively murder the Queen. It's about the possibility that those closest to her might have indirectly contributed to her death through a combination of inaction, misjudgment, or even a cynical calculation of political advantage. Consider this. Elizabeth was notoriously stubborn and independent, especially when it came to her health. She often refused to follow medical advice, dismissed her physician's concerns, and generally resisted any attempts to control her diet or lifestyle. This independent streak, which had served her so well throughout her reign, might have ultimately contributed to her downfall. Could her courtiers and attendants, perhaps fearing her wrath, have been reluctant to challenge her decisions or push her to seek proper medical care? Could they have passively allowed her to neglect her health, knowing that her death would ultimately benefit them or their chosen successor? And then there's the issue of medical treatment itself. Remember, 17th century medicine was still in its infancy. Doctors relied on outdated theories and often employed treatments that were more harmful than helpful. Bloodletting, for example, was a common practice for treating fevers and other ailments, but it could also severely weaken an already frail patient. Is it possible that Elizabeth's physicians, in their attempts to cure her, inadvertently hastened her demise? Could their interventions have masked the true underlying cause of her illness, or even exacerbated her condition to the point of no return? This isn't necessarily about malice or ill intent. It's about the limitations of medical knowledge at the time and the potential for even well-meaning treatments to have disastrous consequences. Finally, we have to consider the role of stress and overwork. Elizabeth was known for her tireless dedication to her duties. She worked long hours, often neglecting her meals and sleep, and carried the weight of an entire kingdom on her shoulders. Chronic stress, as we now know, can have a devastating impact on the body, weakening the immune system and increasing the risk of various illnesses. Could the sheer burden of ruling have ultimately become a kind of slow-acting poison, gradually eroding Elizabeth's health and making her more vulnerable to disease? This is perhaps the most tragic theory of all, suggesting that the very qualities that made her a great queen, her dedication, her resilience, her unwavering commitment to her people, ultimately contributed to her downfall. So where does all this leave us? With a complex web of suspicions, theories, and unanswered questions. The truth about Elizabeth Thurmer's death remains elusive, shrouded in the mists of time and obscured by layers of political intrigue, limited medical knowledge, and the inherent unreliability of historical accounts. While we may never know for certain what truly happened behind the closed doors of Richmond Palace in March 1603, exploring these darker theories allows us to delve deeper into the complexities of the Tudor court and the precarious nature of power. And it reminds us that even the most celebrated figures in history are ultimately vulnerable to the forces of mortality and the machinations of those around them. But there's still modern forensics and new findings that might solve the mystery. Let's dive into the evidence, shall we? For centuries, the story of Elizabeth I's death has been shrouded in mystery, accepted as a natural decline after a long and impactful reign. But what if we told you that modern advancements in historical research and forensic science are now allowing us to peel back the layers, challenging long-held assumptions about her final days? The truth is, piecing together the puzzle of Elizabeth's death is a complex undertaking. Unlike modern investigations, we can't simply exhume her remains and run tests. Instead, we must rely on the documents she left behind: letters, diaries, ambassadorial reports, and court records. These, however, are just pieces of a much larger and often distorted picture. One of the most intriguing avenues of investigation involves re-examining contemporary accounts through the lens of modern medicine. Scholars have meticulously combed through letters and eyewitness reports, comparing descriptions of her symptoms with our current understanding of diseases and conditions. It's like being a historical detective using modern tools to analyze clues from the past. What have they found? Well, the accounts paint a picture of a queen experiencing a constellation of troubling symptoms. Fatigue, fever, loss of appetite, and confusion all point to a possible combination of infections, nutritional deficiencies, and potentially chronic health conditions. Some historians even speculate that she may have been battling pneumonia or septicemia, a life-threatening blood infection. Others suggest we should consider cardiovascular issues, such as a heart attack or stroke, given her age and, let's face it, the monumental levels of stress she endured throughout her reign. Now, of course, These modern medical interpretations can't be definitive without direct examination of her remains, but they do offer plausible explanations for some of the discrepancies we see in the historical record. Imagine trying to diagnose a patient with limited medical knowledge and relying on subjective observations from people who may have had their own agendas. That's precisely the challenge historians face. Beyond the medical, we also have diplomatic correspondence that sheds light on Elizabeth's final days. Ambassadors from Spain, France, and the Low Countries were all keenly interested in the health of the English Queen. They meticulously reported on her condition, noting subtle changes in her appearance, mood, and behavior. These letters are a treasure trove of information, but they also reveal a court brimming with observation and gossip, where even the slightest symptom could have significant political ramifications. Consider this. Some letters describe moments of unexpected alertness amid apparent frailty, while others hint at episodes of confusion. Were these fleeting moments of clarity, or signs of a more serious underlying condition? And how much did political considerations influence what these ambassadors chose to report back to their respective governments? It's like reading between the lines of history, trying to discern the truth behind the carefully crafted words. But the investigation doesn't stop there. Historians have also turned their attention to Elizabeth's diet, lifestyle, and the environmental factors that may have contributed to her decline. Remember, Elizabeth's final weeks coincided with the harsh conditions of early 17th century England. Access to fresh produce was limited, especially during the winter months, and infectious diseases were rampant. Combined with decades of chronic stress and long working hours, these factors likely weakened her immune system, making her more susceptible to illness. Imagine a queen who ruled an empire, yet was ultimately vulnerable to the same environmental challenges as her subjects. And then there's the matter of Tudor medical practices. While physicians of the time were well-intentioned, their treatments could sometimes do more harm than good. Procedures like bloodletting and the use of strong purgatives were common for treating fevers and other ailments. But they could also weaken a patient's body, especially someone already in a fragile state. Could these treatments have unintentionally hastened Elizabeth's decline? It's a sobering question to consider. Another crucial aspect of this investigation involves delving into the cultural and political context surrounding Elizabeth's death. We need to understand how accounts of her final days were filtered through layers of court politics and propaganda. Her courtiers, after all, had a vested interest in portraying her death as peaceful and dignified, reinforcing the image of a controlled and majestic ruler, even in her final moments. Similarly, foreign diplomats may have consciously or unconsciously colored their reports to serve the interests of their governments. Understanding these motivations is essential for interpreting the historical evidence accurately. It reminds us that even so-called factual accounts are shaped by perspective, bias, and the specific circumstances of the time. In recent years, some scholars have even turned to comparative historical analysis. By examining the deaths of other monarchs in similar contexts, they're trying to identify patterns in symptom reporting, succession anxieties, and the interplay between illness and political intrigue. These studies suggest that Elizabeth's death, while certainly unusual given her status and the attention it garnered, fits within broader trends of Tudor and early Stuart mortality. Factors like age, chronic stress, and limited medical knowledge often intersected with courtly maneuvering to create a complex and sometimes murky picture. And finally, we have interdisciplinary approaches that combine history, medicine, and even forensic science to generate new hypotheses. For example, studying skeletal remains from the period can provide valuable insights into the average health, nutrition, and disease burden in Tudor England. While we can't analyze Elizabeth's body directly, this contextual evidence allows us to make more informed inferences about the conditions she faced and the challenges she likely encountered. So what's the bottom line? Well, modern investigations are painting a much more nuanced and complex picture of Elizabeth's death than we've seen before. It was likely influenced by a combination of natural aging, chronic stress, and potentially infectious disease. But it was also shaped by human perception, political necessity, and the historical narrative that was carefully crafted in the aftermath. While the evidence doesn't definitively confirm foul play, the contradictions, rumors, and deliberate management of information suggests that her final days were far from straightforward. Elizabeth's death, when viewed through these modern lenses, reinforces the dualities that defined her legacy. She was a ruler who was both supremely powerful and profoundly human. Her life and death were inextricably intertwined with the social, political, and cultural currents of her time. And the continuing investigation into her final days reminds us that history is never a fixed and settled narrative. Instead, it's a puzzle constantly being reconstructed from fragments, shaped by new discoveries, and forever open to interpretation. It's a story that continues to evolve as we learn more, challenging our assumptions and forcing us to reconsider what we thought we knew.